Debbie, it's so good to see you again and to be here to talk about prodependence and betrayed partners and, or betrayal trauma within relationships. And, how do we even get to the other side of all of this? So I missed out last time. So I'm glad to be back again. For those of you like me who missed out, we can find the previously recorded on sexandrelationshiphealing.com under the resource tab or on YouTube. So if you've missed out on something, that's where you can find it. So Debbie, do a little introduction about yourself and we'll get going.
Sounds great. I'm so grateful to be here. As many of you who have joined in previously know, I am a licensed therapist with Family Strategies Counseling Center in Mesa, Arizona, and we happen to have a sex addiction and betrayal recovery program. And I work with the women who are actually in the program, working and healing from their betrayal trauma, as well as the crisis that they're in as a result of either disclosures or discovery. And so weekly, I am working with women in a group setting as well as when in an individual setting. So I like to come in on our Seeking Integrity, our sex and healthy relationship webinars, bringing something each week that comes up in my office during the week or in the group that I'm leading. And this last week, it seemed like every day I heard the word gaslighting. So I thought it must be a sign from the universe that that's what we're supposed to talk about today. Last week, we talked a lot about boundaries. And so this is a really great extension piece to actually implementing boundaries and how we can recognize gaslighting, to understand exactly what it is. And then we're going to talk about how the betrayed partner, once you recognize it, what are some boundaries I can put in place? And we're going to talk about how do we respond, which includes those boundaries I talked about. Many are already aware, but in review, remember gaslighting actually comes from that 1944 movie where the husband starts doing crazy things around the house and tricking his wife into thinking that she's losing her mind. Because in the end, what he would like is have her committed to an insane asylum so he can basically take over all the possessions and their wealth. And so that's where this first came from. Gaslighting happens in real life, but what we're going to be talking about is how it shows up when I'm in a relationship as a betrayed partner with somebody who is dealing with addiction. So how we define it is that it's behaviors that the addict partner may display where they seem to strategically twist the truth. And they make the betrayed partner believe that somehow they're crazy, that they're wrong. In addition, we have to look at it as a form of emotional abuse at times. Now, I want to also put into place that sometimes those that are in recovery from their addictions, they may not even realize they're gaslighting. So at times it may be unintentional and it's just a learned behavior. While it's hard to break, they need to be able to identify it and step out of it. For some of them, it's become a way for them to kind of avoid telling the truth completely or managing their own shame. And the end result in the betrayed partner is they begin to really doubt their reality, they doubt their memories, and sometimes they're questioning everything, not only within the relationship, but it then spills over into the rest of their life. So, like I mentioned just a second ago, this can happen within this relationship that I'm having with my betraying partner because my betraying partner is trying to cover up some behaviors that they're doing. So they don't want to tell you the truth. So through their own deception, they're figuring out a way to kind of flip it back around or avoid it or somehow kind of get you off track and out of your intuition. And we're going to talk in a minute about intuition and how do we tap back into our intuition. Remember that when an addict is gaslighting, I tell my clients the majority of the time, if not all the time, shame is involved. So their shame has been triggered in some way, shape, or form, and they are using the gaslighting as a way of dealing with that shame. As I mentioned, it's often done to manipulate and control, and it works, and so that's why they do it. And that's the hard thing because the partner, like I said, well, it's not premeditated. and maybe unintentional, they find it's a behavior that gets them out of maybe getting into trouble or revealing the full truth, or maybe even avoiding having their partner feel pain when they hear the truth of what's going on. So how can you tell if you're in a relationship where there's gaslighting by your addicted partner? Usually it's by checking in and tuning in to see, maybe how you're feeling. Like maybe you're feeling like, oh, maybe I'm just too sensitive. Maybe he's right. Maybe I just notice things and I just take it too deeply. I feel it too deeply. You might find yourself confused all the time, especially when you go back to discuss maybe topics that you had gone over in the past, or maybe how events unfolded. And so you might find that there's a lot of confusion and things just don't make sense. Another thing that often shows up is that the partner feels like they're at fault for everything. Somehow they start blaming themselves, or they hear their partner blaming them for everything. And as a result, you find yourself apologizing and saying, I'm sorry a lot. You may even get to a point where you begin to question your own self-worth and you begin to wonder if you're good enough. And then another way that it shows up is, I don't want to share my emotions with you, the betraying partner, because it will just end up in conflict. It'll somehow get flipped around and turned back around on me. And so as a result, you start to experience things like feeling like you're crazy. I do see partners that when they're in a situation where they're having the gaslighting occur, that sometimes they will literally go so limbic that they become enraged. And they're typically a very grounded individual, in the majority of their life, maybe not so much as they're dealing with the betrayal and the crisis they're in, and they're trying to recover from it. But they're pretty good at staying grounded in the rest of their life. We also get into questioning our memory. So if you're questioning your memory, if you're confused about what's going on, like I said previously, if you're apologizing for everything, if you're starting to feel hopeless, depressed, defeated as you try to go and communicate with your partner and it just goes poorly, and then you want to start isolating from others, you might consider that if you can't get what you need with your partner, and every time you go, you're experiencing this, that maybe there's some gaslighting going on. I don't want to use that term lightly. So we want to maybe even check in with a therapist and even take it to, if you've got a group setting where you can process situations with them and kind of get some feedback and support from people that have really good knowledge of something like gaslighting. That's really, really helpful. I know sometimes partners just feel like if they ever get pushback from their the betraying partner, that somehow it's gaslighting. So we've got to be very careful. And I'm going to get into some specific examples of phrases that you might hear. But the last thing that I want to mention that is a result from having a lot of gaslighting from your betraying partner is the fact that we lose touch with our intuition. And intuition is such an important part of how we create safety. And so we lose that gut instinct. People typically describe their intuition as, I've got a gut feeling, or I just kind of knew it in my heart, or the thought just came to me and I just knew it was right. And so you oftentimes go to that betraying partner and you might question or ask them, you're trying to get information. I'm trying to make sure there's safety. I want to make sure that my attachment with you is safe. And so I approach you and I start to ask you questions. I'm trying to get data. I'm trying to make sense of maybe all these things I'm noticing. And my intuition is telling me something's going on here. But when I check in with my betraying partner, if they are in gaslighting behaviors, oftentimes you're going to hear something like, no, that never happened. I didn't know what you're talking about. That never happened. And so that's when we start to question our reality. And so there's some ways that we can respond to that. And I'm going to give you some ideas as we go through this, as some of the things that you can do. So when somebody is gaslighting you and they're telling you that something didn't happen or that you are wrong, that it didn't occur, then you're going to want to start journaling. This is one way so that you can maybe, after you've had a discussion, maybe there's been an agreement, maybe you've had some disconnection in this discussion, and maybe you outline some things or things happened, just make note of that. Because when we lose our sense of reality and what happened, we might the next day think back on that disconnection, that conversation that didn't go so well, and we start to even question how we saw it. So by journaling it, that's really, really helpful. You can take that to a trusted friend to check in to see if your reality is accurate. You can take it into therapy. But the nice thing is if you start to question your reality, you can go back and look maybe through the journaling and see if there's a pattern, see if there's a history, and it will kind of give you an indication of, no, my intuition's dead on. You know, here's another time where my intuition was telling me this. I approached my partner. I did a check-in. I was trying to find out. They didn't tell me the full truth. Instead, they gaslighted me. Later on, I found out that what I felt, what my intuition told me was actually true. And so it's a really good way for us to start to step back into really trusting our intuition. That was one of the hardest things that I had to do. And I'm going to talk go a little deeper on that in just a second, because I had been so gaslighted. I really doubted everything, my reality, how I saw things. Now, the next thing that you may hear if somebody is gaslighting you is they might say to you, you are so dramatic, or you are so over the top, or you are so overreacting. And as a result, the betraying partner starts to really question, right, whether or not they are overreacting, and they feel very invalidated. And they feel like the gaslighter is in essence telling them that what you feel is wrong and you have no right to feel that way. So in response to that, if you've got a recovering partner who is able to step into their empathy a little more, maybe they're learning that as part of their skills and tools in recovery, a really great thing to do is to ask them to maybe role reverse with you. You know, I want you just to step into my shoes for a moment. Or maybe if the shoe were on the other foot, you know, can you see where I'm coming from? And to see if we can maybe invite them or guide them in to trying to understand your reality and maybe why you feel so passionately or strongly about something. That in reality, you're maybe not dramatic at all, but you might be fighting for connection. And so there may be some intensity behind that because you're sensing that lack of disconnection, or you're fearful that something's going on that's going to maybe even disrupt some of the connection you're starting to create as you're both in recovery. If the addict partner continues to tell you you're dramatic and basically indicating that you have no right to those feelings, that you are completely wrong, then one of the things I tell my clients to do is step out of the argument. Choose to disengage, but you've got to do it in a way that is prone to help maintain connection. Because lots of times we are limbic when this happens. And so it's like, I'm done with you. I'm out of here. I'm walking away, which is in a way a form of gaslighting itself. So what we've got to do is call the timeout, whether you call it as, hey, I need to take a pause. I need to, just call a timeout. I'd like to come back and discuss this later. So can we just maybe take a couple hours? I want you to think about what I've been saying. And maybe as we both get grounded, you'll be able to step into my shoes and understand where I'm coming from. Another thing I like to have my clients try out is something that I call the broken record. And that is, yes, I just can validate what I'm hearing you say or reflect what I'm hearing you say. And then I like to use the word however, and then add what my boundary is. So it would look like this if somebody tells me I'm being dramatic. I would say back to them, I can understand why you might feel like I'm being dramatic. However, in this moment, I am really trying to be heard. And I feel really strongly about what I'm feeling in this moment. And I just want you to understand. And they may be coming back with, yeah, but you're just so dramatic. And I would repeat the exact same thing. Yes, I understand, that you feel like I'm being really dramatic. However, I'm just really needing to be understood. I want you to hear what I have to say. And it is a great way to kind of put the boundary out there, keep going, and you can do it and stay much more grounded if you choose to use something like that broken record technique. I really like that. Another thing that can happen when somebody's gaslighting us is they will turn it on us and they will say, yeah, but you do this, or what about the time you did this? So we get a lot of whatabouts. They kind of throw the kitchen sink at you. They just kind of dump on you all the things that you've done wrong in the past. And so when that happens, the betrayed partner feels like that the betraying partner is weaponizing some of the things they've done in the past. And we all make mistakes. That's just a fact of life. And sometimes we do things better than others. But the point is it takes us and diverts us from what we're really talking about. And as a result, the betrayed partner, again, feels invalidated, possibly very defensive because their own shame has come up. You've just pointed out what I'm doing wrong. And what I'm trying to do is get you to understand what you're doing to me that's hurting me. And you've now flipped it back around on me. And so I may get defensive. I may get angry. I might shut down. But most often we get into a power struggle where we start back and forth. We try to one up each other. And so now we are caught in all of our stories. So the response to that and how we get out of that is maybe bringing it back around and going, you know what? Let's bring it into the here and now. And let's talk about the issue that we started out with. I want to discuss what I'm observing rather than getting into everything that's happened or everything that I'm doing. We can discuss that at another time. I'd be happy to. But for right now, let's just keep it at this. One of the ways I will say it to people is I feel like we've gone down a different path and maybe we need to get back on the path we started out on. Just a quick and easy way, kind of a visual, and it feels less threatening sometimes to use just an analogy like that. Another thing that you might hear is, it's your fault. You're going to experience some blame shifting. So you might hear somebody who's gaslighting you use the words like, you always do this, you never do that, those real absolutes. And their thinking is so black and white. And no matter how hard you try, what you're getting into is a dynamic where you, as the betrayed partner, is hearing, I am right and you are wrong. And as a result, you're going to, again, your shame could come up. You're going to feel invalidated. You might feel like you're going crazy, especially when I'm going to you with a concern with maybe something I'm observing. And you're going with your talking boundary, which remember is, here's what I'm seeing and observing. And here's the stories I'm going into. Here's what I think about that. Here's what it's making me feel. And then here's my vulnerable request. Here's what I need from you. And instead, if the blame gets shifted back on you, it's really hard to stay grounded. And so one of the things you can do is, again, to ask your partner who's doing the gaslighting to let's focus on the solution. Let's bring it back. Instead of assigning blame, let's figure out how can we do this differently? How can we do this in a way that creates connection? Because I believe that both of us are wanting connection on some level. We're wanting to create safety. So rather than getting into blame, which is going to cause us to disconnect, how can we come up with a solution in the here and now, right? We can even ask, so how would you like me to have done it differently? Or how can we do it differently moving forward? Or are you open to hearing how I would like it to be done differently? All of those questions are a great way to get us out of the blame, focusing on solutions so we can come up with something that we can work on moving forward. Okay, a couple more to go and that's all. So one of the things that a betraying partner may do when they are really in their shame is they may turn and they may gaslight you by saying, gosh, why are you even with me if I'm so bad? I just can't believe you even put up with me. And again, this comes from shame. And oftentimes it's because the betraying partner either is maybe flooded with their own emotions, they're deep in their shame. And so all they can do is just kind of, in a way, they're just kind of putting the problem back onto you. Well, it's your problem. You're with me. Why are you even staying with me? But as a result, the betrayed partner will start to experience shame that they're even in the relationship. They'll start to question why they're even in the relationship, why they're even putting up with their addict partner's behaviors. And so that's where we really start to question our self-esteem, and we start to question even our own sanity for staying in something that is so difficult. So when we get to a point like that, my recommendation is you respond by taking a time out, and then maybe finding that place of where you can get grounded, get clarity, get back connected to the prefrontal part of your brain, that thinking rational part of your brain, and start looking at the behaviors that are happening with your partner and not the character flaws. It's the behaviors we want to address. Because oftentimes when we're both limbic, what we start doing is we almost identify somebody's behaviors as who they are. And so I might say, you are, so, and it might be something really derogatory. And in reality, maybe it's just a behavior. And so we've got to be able to step out of that and look. We need to look at the reality of our situation. So oftentimes I recommend that, gosh, if you're really questioning, gosh, why am I in this relationship if, he's this bad and I'm willing to put up with it, then I say, go find somebody who is your wise, compassionate friend who will give you those compassionate truth bombs and help you sit down and look at the reality of your situation, because it might be appropriate. But just remember that if we are in a difficult conversation and we hear our betraying partner say that it is gaslighting, and probably the best thing to do is to take a time out and just ask to come back later and make sure you get grounded. And then lastly, another one that I see is that sometimes people will say something when they're gaslighting us, and it may have an element of truth, but they're doing it in the form of joking. They might say, oh, I was just joking. You're just way too sensitive. But in reality, whenever we joke or we tease, there's some truth in that. So it really makes us start to question when I have a partner who's using humor to deflect maybe some really difficult emotions or feelings that they may be having. So again, as a betrayed partner, I might feel invalidated or shamed. And of course, I'm going to feel a lack of disconnection, or a lack of connection rather, and disconnection just like that the minute the joke is said. So what we can do is we can, first of all, the response would be check in and see, right, if the humor was appropriate, right? Kind of validate, check in, make sure that you weren't in some of the stories in your own head. And then you can even ask the partner if they were using humor either to manipulate or deflect, or because they were uneasy. And then you just need to let them know that what you did wasn't funny. It was actually really hurtful. And I can't remain in a conversation with you if that is how you're going to speak, because it's just too painful. So I would like to call a timeout, and let's try to get back together again and discuss this. And then maybe make plans before you leave of when you're going to get back together. So anyway, that's kind of what you might see come up. I see that often as people come in to see me, that these are some of the examples they give me. And so just really briefly, how do you deal with the gaslighting once you know you're in it? If you can tell by now, with all of the ways I told you to respond, probably the number one thing was to tell yourself to ground yourself. You have to take a time out. And grounding yourself is a huge part of your recovery. Because remember, when we have a hijacked brain, right, it's hijacked because we're in trauma, we're in crisis, which means that instead of operating out of the front part of my brain, that prefrontal cortex, I'm in that primitive mid-back part of my brain called the limbic system, and I'm in fight, flight, or freeze. I'm in survival. There is no logic, there is no reasoning there. And so I have to constantly and intentionally work on grounding myself, which means I've got to know what's going on and be aware of what's going on internally at all times. And so the minute I feel myself start to become ungrounded, that's when I need to have a really good internal boundary that says, you know what, whenever I get that way, I'm going to let my partner know, and I'm going to take a time out. Or whenever I see them exhibiting gaslighting behaviors, I'm going to take a time out so that I don't get ungrounded. The other thing too is to make sure to identify, establish, and maintain your boundaries around this. So taking a time out is an example. It might also be that you maybe even tell your partner up front when you're grounded that, you know, I'm willing to stay in a conversation with you. However, if you blame me for something or you tell me that I'm not seeing things correctly, it no longer feels safe. So just so you know, I'm going to need to step away from that conversation and get myself grounded, find some safety. And that's just how I'm going to do it from here on out. And I want you to be aware of that. Also make an internal boundary that you're just not going to argue. That when your partner gaslights you, remember they're limbic as well. So even if you're really grounded and you're in that prefrontal part of your brain and you feel like you're so grounded and you're logical, one of you is not. One of you is limbic. And so they've got their hijacked brain, even though you're grounded. So set that boundary that you're just not going to argue and step out of it. Come back later. Another thing is learn how and practice how to say no. And that kind of goes along with, you know, I'm not going to let you talk to me that way, or no, I'm not going to question my reality, and no, that's not appropriate. No, this doesn't feel safe. And so I'm just not willing to put up with that any longer because it's just too hard and too painful for me. Like I said earlier, keep a journal, keep track of things. It's a really great way, not only to, like I've talked about in the past, get it out of your body, write it down, you can refer to it, you can see if there's patterns. And I also encourage my clients to tune into your intuition by keeping a journal. And sometimes as thoughts or ideas come to you, maybe you get a gut feeling, maybe all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I know this and to be true. I feel it in my chest or my heart, or this thought came to me. Write it down. One of the exercises I'll tell my clients to do as they're learning to tune back into their intuition is to get little notebooks and maybe put one in your purse, one in the car, one by your bed. And as things come to you, as you get maybe those thoughts, and remember, these thoughts typically are thoughts that are not going to cause us to go extremely limbic. They may cause us to start questioning our safety or wanting to get more information. That's different. But I want you to start recognizing that I believe our intuition is 100% accurate. That's been my experience in reconnecting with my intuition. And I first started doing it by writing down every little thing that came to me. And it could be something as simple as, I need to text so-and-so. You just came to mind. I'm checking in on you. Or I need to remember to, tell so-and-so thank you. Or gosh, I need to make sure that I take care of this for my child or check in on them. I'm worried about them about this. What I found was that the more I did it in everyday life, in the areas where it wasn't as challenging, the more I started to trust my intuition in my relationships. So really start listening. I also tell my clients that one of the other things to do is, as you're reconnecting with your intuition, is notice when you get those intuitive feelings. My personal belief is that we all get it in different ways. We feel it differently in our body. So know how it feels in your body. Know what it is you need to do to tune into that. For some people, it's I need to get quiet. I might need to meditate for a bit and then sit in silence. Silly enough, some people will say, oh, it happens in the shower or driving down the street. And for me, it happens, believe it or not, when I'm blow drying my hair, which is so crazy. I don't know why, but just a little side note. And I've learned to really listen when all of a sudden, because my mind is just so still in that moment that ideas come to me, write them down. And then find support, check your intuition in with other people, with the group you're in, with your therapist, with that trusted friend who gives you those compassionate truth bombs. But make sure that you do go to individuals that are very grounded and very healthy in their approach. And I think that the more you do that, the more you're going to find that your intuition is going to help you stay more grounded and firm in what you know to be true. And what you'll see is you'll have to do less safety seeking. The problem is my intuition tells me to do something, and then it's like, I've got to prove my intuition correct. So oftentimes we go into safety seeking, and what that does is it throws us into more of a limbic state. So be aware of that in that moment. Instead of going into the safety seeking, choose to believe your intuition. And then just keep journaling, keep checking in, keep watching, keep communicating with your partner. And as that betraying partner gets into recovery, I notice that as their shame decreases and as their empathy increases, you see a lot of the gaslighting behavior go away. They learn to get more in tune and more aware of what they have been doing. So anyway, I hope that's helpful, because that seems to be something that comes up quite often in my office.
Oh, it's super helpful. And the what you just shared too with the going to the safety seeking to try to validate throws you into limbo. Like I did not know that, so it makes sense. As I'm thinking about that, I was like, of course, because now you're going into the, into the chaos and into, safety seeking. So, I scribbled down a whole bunch of notes, but, the shame, I absolutely do believe, that is, is the genesis of, of this, of the gaslighting and everything, but I think unfortunately, mistakenly, addicts perceive that gaslighting, it gets them out of consequences temporarily, but they get busted and they know that they're lying to themselves. And so on some level, even if it's unconscious, or subconscious, or whatever, it's not intentional, there still is, it's part of who we are. We know we're not living in integrity. So, I think it serves the second, it serves the moment, but, it ultimately, is counterproductive, overall. I love the broken record. I was thinking, I wonder what the record is for somebody having to repeat the broken record, is it a dozen times or whatever? But I thought, but everything that you were talking about really is about grounding and just maintaining, because because yes, otherwise it's the you, and it just escalates, and then there's no progress. So if the goal is that we're going to do our relationship differently, if the goal is that we're working towards creating safety for each and both of us, then we need to do things differently, going back to the same patterns that are destructive and escalating and chaotic, don't help or serve anyone, and unfortunately, I think it really is easy for an escalated partner for the betrayer to go, yeah, see, and I hate to say she, but she's crazy. Look what I have to put up with, and that I hate that, but I know that happens, that happens too. So one of the things I wondered about is, like, you talked about, if the betrayer is in recovery, we often deal with people who are not in recovery. So do you see trying to use the same, grounding, journaling, and all of that? Do you see that as an effective coping mechanism for the betrayed partner, even if somebody isn't really working on getting healing and better?
Absolutely. The simple answer to that is yes. That's the short answer. The long answer is remember that the purpose that gaslighting serves is to throw, right, the betrayed partner out of their intuition and really off balance so that you start to question your reality. And the goal of the journaling is to really tune into what is your reality and owning your reality rather than questioning it all the time. And so you can use a lot of these same techniques that I talked about with a partner who is, a betraying partner who's not in recovery. This still works. Now, they may not be as agreeable to work with you. And so, in essence, the goal at that point is to step out of that dynamic in whatever way possible. As you were talking, Tammy, I thought of another couple of ideas, and that is, oftentimes when somebody's gaslighting you, they're not aware they're gaslighting you. They're telling you you're not believing it correctly. Sometimes just one simple response is, that's not the way how I remember it happening. And sometimes just a very grounded, simple response gets you out of that dynamic. And just learning, that I'm not going to get anywhere if somebody's gaslighting me. I have to take the pause and the break. So even if my partner's not in recovery, doesn't understand gaslighting, doesn't want to stop gaslighting, is in it all the time, you have to be aware of it. You've got to know, as the betrayed partner, how it shows up, how it makes you feel, the words that you might hear them say, so that then you can put a stop to that kind of a dynamic. And then parallel to that, like I said, you're stepping into your own truth, owning your own reality, working on staying grounded, working on connecting to your intuition.
Well, and those little shifts, I think you feel more empowered, but and less ping pong balled around by the betrayer who's trying to make you feel crazy. But also it starts to shift because now the betrayer is bumping up against something that's very different. It isn't like, oh yeah, we got into this fight and then we blow up, or the dynamic that you talked about of like, well, why are you even with me? And I hear, unfortunately, too often too, the partners, that are going, what's wrong with me that I chose this person, that I'm with this person, that I don't leave, all of those things. And that takes away from the possibility of healing for each and both. It's shame on both sides then. So challenging, but it's interesting. You talked about boundaries, and then you talked about boundaries here, and Gavin Sharp did a great webinar on Wednesday on boundaries. So we've got kind of a theme going, but and he talked about boundaries, and you kind of mentioned it too, as like the intuition in all areas of your life. He talked about boundaries in all areas of your life, not just about boundaries within this relationship. And they're not punitive. It really is about creating safety, and space. And how do we do this life and relationships differently and better? So if you missed the previous webinar with Debbie or the one with Gavin on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, under the resource tab, you'll find those, and lots of other good stuff too. So there's a question: what advice do you have for the betraying partner to avoid gaslighting? That's great. Thank you for asking that too. Yeah.
So, man, I would like to get a hold of the men's groups.
Yeah.
Work. Yeah. And go in and do a whole thing on gaslighting. We could do a group one night on, hey, just check in and see, do you happen to gaslight? I think that oftentimes, if we go and we say to them, you're gaslighting me, it's going to do nothing but create more disconnection. They're going to get defensive. They're going to go into their shame. So and I don't want the betrayed partner to feel like, oh, here I am, I'm responsible for something else now in recovery. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes I find that the betrayed partner kind of has a better sense of what's going on as far as the dynamic, and that gaslighting's happening. Remember, they're the observer. They're observing it, they're not in it. And so it might be that you have to start just making them aware of the fact of, hey, you know, how you're behaving right now, or when you do this, this, and this, when I see you do this, when I hear you say this, I go into my thinking that that this behavior is, you're gaslighting me. Do you even know what that is? You know, and maybe they're open to hearing about it, but encourage them to maybe go back to their therapist and learn about it, go back to their group if they're in recovery, or encourage them to maybe even look it up, and just let them know you can set boundaries even at that point and say, you know, this just makes me feel crazy and I just feel like I can't get through to you, so I'm so frustrated and I don't want to be angry and I don't want to, you know, end up going limbic. So, you know, just want you to know that in the future, if I see something that is gaslighting behavior, which includes, and just make a simple list, right, you telling me things didn't happen, or denying, you know, my truth, or not letting you have my feelings, or blaming me, then that means that we're not going to get anywhere. So I've got to step out of the conversation, and I'll come back to you later on, but I'm going to be calling a timeout. So oftentimes it's a little bit at a time, making them aware of it, encourage them to reach out to other people for information. If possible, go look it up for themselves. A lot of your really awesome recovery books out there have, you know, information on gaslighting. And so you can maybe even go to some sources on that. Again, lots of times I like to refer people back to your own therapist and ask what your therapist recommends, because in that way, your therapist is there to guide you. Your therapist can tell you the resources that they're aware of. And then as you come into session and you're working on that, then you're kind of on the same page to begin with.
And so this is the betrayer asking, and I'm going like, okay, at the end of the day, gaslighting is a form of lies. Lying is pervasive in all of, I mean, addicts lie. You know, it doesn't matter what form of addiction you have. So I would encourage you to look at, so in the 12 steps, we do a searching a fearless moral inventory. We're looking at our character defects. We're looking at all things. But what are you looking for the gaslighting, for the lie to do for you? What purpose are you looking for it to serve? If you're like, oh, I don't want my partner to get mad at me. Is your partner going to be more mad when they discover that you did a half truth? When, is it ultimately going to serve the relationship? I can, 100% guarantee that a partner would prefer you say, I don't want to hurt you. I know you're going to be angry about this, but da 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 da. That is stepping into our integrity. That is coming from an honest place. They don't have to like the message, but man, they're going to start going, wow, this person showed up and told the truth, because otherwise they're sitting there going like, that doesn't sound right, and they either go into safety seeking or they're over journaling, but it still is dividing you. Like, it's keeping you away from this relationship that I think you want to, to work on having be better. So I, as an addict, I would encourage you, what are you looking for the lie, half truth, lie of omission? What are you looking for that to do for you? You're looking for something, out of that. And check in with your sponsor, check in with your therapist, check in with that. Is it ultimately going to serve? Go journal. Is it ultimately going to serve your recovery and your relationship? If you do this. So that's, we call it gaslighting. It's lying. I'm lying to you and telling you that the sky is purple when it's blue. But you're going to go, oh yeah, because I'm so dramatic. I'm, of course, how could I have thought the sky was blue? It's very difficult, and it keeps the relationship in a power differential, because one of you is in a power up, one of you is in a power down. And that's not good. You ultimately, for a healthy relationship, want to be the two of you, against the world and moving together what's best for your relationship. Gaslighting, lying is not. So.
And I want to add to what you just said too. And I mentioned this, but it was very briefly in the very beginning, that gaslighting is about control and manipulation. So either I'm controlling how you're going to respond to me, I'm controlling, the information, I'm controlling on some aspect something that if the full truth came out, right, there would be a consequence that maybe I am trying to avoid. And that is manipulating as well. I'm trying to manipulate you so that you won't be mad at me, or that you won't, somehow really know the full extent, or whatever it is. So notice that, look for that kind of behavior. And then as the betrayed partner, you can actually put words to that. You can say, hey, when I hear you say this, this, and this, that's really controlling. I love curiosity. And that I'm just curious, what are you trying to control by not telling me this? Or I feel, that when I hear this, this, and this, it feels like I'm being manipulated.
And it's okay for an addict to go, I'm ashamed of, identify the shame. Shame is a useless emotion. Like, it doesn't do us any guilt. Like, okay, I shouldn't have done that, well, I can learn from that. But shame, it's just the spiral. And like Debbie was talking about, it's like, why are you even with me anymore? Because like, I'm so horrible, that's manipulative in and of itself, as well. Because like, then it's like, oh, but I love you. And like, I see the good in you, and I'm whatever, so, there's always an ulterior motive,
Yeah.
and that doesn't ultimately serve the relationship. It doesn't serve healing.
Yeah. And the other thing I just thought of is, as you're talking about that too, is even we as betrayed partners, we need to be aware of gaslighting behavior. Because a lot of times, I have to take accountability, like you said, for some of the things I've done, right? That's the guilt. I'm taking accountability. I'm correcting it. I'm human. I make mistakes. And so there are times though where we want to just blame shift as well. So be aware that there might be, some things that maybe we're around a lot, we just start doing it back, or so just be very aware of that, because it can go both ways. Typically though, the betrayed partner is more on the receiving end, but oftentimes that does come up in sessions when we talk about, okay, let's make sure that we're showing up authentically and honestly, I'll get it out, that we're out of our shame, and that we're not stepping in and joining them in that dance where we're both gaslighting each other back and forth.
Well, you mentioned, and I made a note of this too, that like, if I go, I'm out of here, and you said that's a form of gaslighting. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, that is kind of that stonewalling kind of a thing of, if you say something I don't like, then I'm done, and I throw up this wall of, what, I'm done with you. I'm walking away and you're not getting through to me anymore. And it leaves the other person feeling like they're hanging. It feels like you're being abandoned. It feels like this really abrupt disconnection. And so we have to be very aware of, if I'm all of a sudden internally getting more limbic, right? And my response is to completely cut you off and out and walk away from you. That is a form of gaslighting, because I'm controlling the outcome in this moment. I am manipulating you. I'm shutting you down, in a moment where maybe you really need to be heard, because I can't manage my own emotions, or I don't like what I'm hearing. So therefore I'm done listening to you. So we have to be very careful that we don't do that. That one is one that comes up quite often.
And I can see that on either side, like, either party doing that. But like you said, it does not promote communication. It doesn't promote curiosity. It doesn't promote vulnerability and growing intimacy. So.
Right.
Other questions? We've got time, so we would welcome your questions, on any of this. So yeah, I mean, I watched the movie because, like, you'd heard the term, so I watched it, and the husband was literally going around, and it was in the olden days when there were gas lights, and
Mhm.
he was turning them down, he was turning them up and down so that it's brighter, it's dark, dimmer, and all of this kind of thing. And she is perceiving she's going crazy, and he was trying to make her think that, but everybody else around him too, oh, she's crazy, so it was interesting to go watch the very old
The
movie.
movie.
So
I need to watch it. I haven't watched it yet. I've seen clips of it, but I haven't watched the full movie from beginning to end. But
yeah, I
anyway,
did it a number of years ago, so I don't remember all of it, but I do remember thinking, oh, it makes perfect sense, they call it that.
Yeah.
So
I would even love some of those that are listening to the webinar to even just kind of share with me if they ever feel like dropping a line, just some of the ways they've dealt with gaslighting that's been effective in a healthy way that helps them to stay grounded. Or even if you're challenged and you're not sure, how to handle maybe a gaslighting situation. That's what we're here for, is to help you kind of figure your way out of it. Because the bottom line is that as human beings, we really want that connection. We want that attachment. And part of that is being able to communicate and to be heard and to get to that place of empathy. And so that doesn't mean I have to agree with you and what you're necessarily saying to me, but I can step into your shoes, right? I can put that shoe on the other foot for a moment to try to understand where you're coming from. And that's what it's about. Oftentimes what we're doing is we're fighting, to be right. We're fighting to get both of us to agree to the exact same thing. And in some situations that just doesn't work.
So we've got a couple of questions. The first one, what if the other party is using abusive language and you say you are calling a timeout? Is that stonewalling or gaslighting?
It is neither one, because I would, when you're grounded, go to your partner. Now, remember, when I'm grounded, I'm connected to the front part of my brain. I've got logic, reasoning, emotional regulation. I'm in this place of empathy. Basically, I'm grounded, and I'm going to put the boundary out there and say, I am so available to talk about hard things. However, when I hear you say this or this or this or anything that is abusive, I need you to understand that I will be calling a timeout in that moment, and I'm going to be stepping away to create safety. And at some point, I will come back to you, whether it's in 30 minutes, because we need at least 20 minutes to regulate. And I say that's if you're in a you're really skillful at grounding. I think it takes a little longer personally. Or I'm going to come back to you in 24 hours and we'll try this again. So again, when you take the pause, the time out, it's the way you say it too. If I just say time out, I'm done, and walk away, yeah, that feels more like gaslighting. But if I say I need to call a timeout right now and go create some safety, and we can discuss this later, I'll check back in with you, then that's appropriate. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, it does. And I agree 100%. One of the things I have found is having the conversation when it's not in the heat of the moment. You're both more likely to have your executive part of the brain functioning, and just say, like, we're going to have difficult things we have to talk about. I want to be able to have those conversations. It does not serve our conversation well if either of us get to an abusive language. So if that happens, both of us have the ability to call a timeout, and have those, have the guidelines set up, in a non-combative time frame, so that, because then when it happens and you're able to go, this is one of those times, I'm calling a timeout. We're going to do what we said. We're going to come back and whatever time frame, whatever, we do need to talk about this particular, situation, issue, whatever. But we're going to do it when we both, are able to, to have that conversation. And you may have to have 3 of those timeouts, to get through one particular, or you may say, this is one we really need to go talk to our qualified professional, because this one is just too much for the 2 of us to navigate. All good. But
all good.
But you are, calling a timeout is very different. Like I mean, I think you did a beautiful job of demonstrating, very different than I'm out of here, and abandoning the situation. So,
Yeah.
and then the next question is, where does the prodependency way of being apply to how we handle gaslighting?
Well, according to my interpretation, if we kind of look at it through that attachment lens, that remember, we don't want to feel disconnection with a partner. We always want to feel connection because we're wired for human connection. So if I, as a betraying partner, is doing something that might really create a disruption to the attachment I have with my partner, I might minimize it or deny it by going into my gaslighting behaviors. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want you to see the real me. I don't want you to be aware of everything because you might leave me if you knew everything. There's a variety of reasons. So in that prodependence framework, gaslighting comes in, I think, as a very maladaptive way for a betraying partner to maintain connection. I guess that's a good way to put it. And it's not a healthy way because remember, I like to look at things on a continuum. On one end, I've got those things that are not healthy. They're what I call they're more maladaptive, meaning that they cause problems in the long run, as opposed to those on the other end that are healthier, that create healthier relationships in the long run. So that's where I would see gaslighting. And remember that oftentimes we learn gaslighting by maybe even having it in our lives growing up. And so we kind of take some of those patterns just from what we've learned in life, and it becomes a way of coping and, again, in the long run, maintaining connection on some level because we don't want to feel disconnection. We don't want to have that feeling of I'm being abandoned or I'm going to be left alone. And so that's how I would frame it within that whole prodependence context. How about you, Tammy?
And I agree. And I think, prodependency is about, the healthy attachments, but it still is about boundaries. It's about safety. It's about grounding, all of those things, you taking care of you. I think the difference would be that it's easy for somebody with a codependent language to go, oh, well, it's your family of origin and you're putting up with this stuff because, so it goes to the pathologizing side. And I'm just going, gosh, you love somebody who's struggling. What can you do to take care of you to make it safe for you in this moment, and what can be done, to have better communication and to navigate moving forward on the spectrum, that Debbie was just talking about. Because, if you're way over here on the maladaptive and, you're putting, I don't want to say putting up, you're being put in a position where you're being gaslighted, and now that person starts moving into recovery, then the relationship can become to a, it's not going to be all perfect, trust me. It's still going to be humans and there's still going to be stuff, but you can be in a much healthier way of dealing with it. That said, like I kind of asked about is like, what happens if the addict or betrayer stays over here in the maladaptive? I still think partners can find, safety and better support for, helping them not, helping them tag into their intuition again, so that they aren't just going, oh, I must be so wrong. So I think prodependency absolutely supports healthy boundaries, safety, grounding, being good with you. It's not all about, oh, you have to stay with this person no matter what they do. That is not codependent. So, okay. And then last question, because we're out of time. How does the betrayed spouse deal with a sex addict when he continuously uses, I can't handle talking about this, so I need a timeout, to the point of never getting any real issues? That would be, I need a professional therapist to help. So, yeah.
I agree. You need a professional therapist on that, because I think that's something that needs to be dealt together in a therapist's office, because what's happening is you're not getting anywhere. Every time you go to that person, they're calling a timeout because it's too much. That's telling me that their window of tolerance is very narrow. And that, you know, from the framework of, you know, how I approach recovery for both the addict and the partner is, then you're not doing the recovery tool, you're not using your recovery tools, including, and number one, self-care, right? And those things that you need to do to really increase your window of tolerance. So that means I can't sit in a hard conversation with you. So I start to go limbic just instantly, and I'm out of there calling it timeout. Well, as the betrayed partner, if that's what I'm dealing with, I'm going to feel so stuck, like I'm not getting anywhere with you. And so maybe even encourage your partner, the betraying partner, to maybe go in and either work with that with their therapist, encourage them of, hey, we need to be able to have difficult conversations. And every so often I will bring in a spouse into a session just to kind of go through, okay, how can we have hard conversations and stay in this conversation when it's difficult and stay grounded and not have to just back away or cut them off, or, you know, even, I don't call it gaslighting, but maybe even saying things that are going to cause complete disconnection. So that's a real difficult one. You know, that betraying partner needs to work on increasing their window of tolerance so they can have hard conversations.
Yeah, that's what we learn in recovery. So to me, it's more recovery work because what we learn in recovery is that we can handle uncomfortable conversations. We can handle uncomfortable emotions. That's what we, you know, want to escape from at all costs. So to me, that makes me wonder where they are really, not just what they say they're doing, but where they really are on their recovery path. No judgment, don't know, just making this up in my head. It says this happens in marital therapy too. If you're working with a regular marriage therapist that it doesn't understand addiction and everything, and I'm not saying you are, but when I hear marital therapy, often somebody's going to a marriage and family therapist that doesn't have the betrayal trauma background, that doesn't have the addiction background. So I've used this analogy before. It's like going to a general practitioner when you have cancer. You want a cancer specialist who's really going to know what they're doing. So making sure that you have the right professional, but yeah, what I hear is your relationship is stuck until your betraying spouse has the ability to tolerate more. I mean, here's the thing, they're uncomfortable. You know, you are not, I learned this early on. I'm not going to die of an uncomfortable feeling. I didn't, you know, I've survived them. So it can be uncomfortable. I cannot like it. But, you know, I have learned, you know, I had to learn early on grounding, you know, put my feet on the ground, pay attention to where I am, you know, have a difficult conversation with somebody. I'm going to look them in the eye. I'm going to say, Debbie, what I heard you saying is, and I'm going to be concentrating on what you're saying, not, I need to leave, you know? So anyway, and then somebody put in the chat, this gaslighting and prodependence topic needs more time. Can you do a follow-up in Q&A? Yes, we can. Absolutely. But also remember any of the Q&A. So like next week, you know, or next 2 weeks from now, if Debbie talks about something else, you can still bring this topic back. So, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I do think that this is a great topic.
Especially as you think about it, write those down, bring them back. I love to problem solve and have people bring things to me, and we can kind of use that as a teaching moment as well. And also coming up with identifying what's going on and coming up with solutions. That's what we need when we're in betrayal and we're experiencing that. I need to know something I can do in the here and now, because I feel so powerless in other areas of my life in this relationship.
Well, and somebody said their credentials. So, and I say this, and I shouldn't say it on the recording, but you know, like there's a bunch of CSATs I refer to. There's a bunch that I don't. But it's also okay to say this isn't working. Like if you know, if this isn't working. You know, what is the plan for my betraying partner to to learn to develop more empathy, to be able to tolerate, have more emotional tolerance. I mean, but hopefully he's really in recovery, and you're starting to see, because it's a process. This is not an overnight. This is going completely against an addict's internal, it's everything that we avoid. So
Yeah.
so it takes
Can I
time.
just add one last thing
Please.
to that, because
Yeah.
this came to my mind, and that is oftentimes go into the counselor's session, the marital therapy, the couples counseling, identifying the pattern. Here's the pattern we're in. Here's what I'm noticing. Whenever I bring up something really difficult, I hear him say, and then I see him do. And this is creating this in me. Here's what I need. So be very clear, very grounded, very logical, but outline and say, we've got to get through this because we're not getting anywhere. I feel stuck. And I think that if you go in there with that, and you might even say, even what I'm thinking about that in my head is I just feel like that's kind of like stonewalling or gaslighting me or cutting me off. And it's just creating problems. So really get clarity, and don't be afraid to speak up yourself when you go into the couples counseling and say, we've got to figure out a way out of this pattern.
Say it in a very grounded way. And I hate to have to say this, but too often partners still get identified as, look at how crazy they are. And I hear this all the time. So I'm not, I am not saying, so if you can do exactly what Debbie said, here's the pattern, and you're just relaying data, that will serve you well. And, I think that's, I've tried to coach a couple of partners who are like, I'm going to go in, and I said, no, write it down and say, and do it in the, your calmest voice of, this is where I'm at. This isn't working. And here's what I'm looking to do. How can we move forward to that? And I think I think that could be super helpful. So I love that idea, Debbie.
Yeah, and it looks like next time we're going to answer a question about not being able to get your spouse to participate in couples therapy. So how can
keep coming back? We're way late, so I'm sorry.
So,
I should have held a better boundary.
We will get to that. I don't want you to feel like you're forgotten, but tune in 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you then.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great couple of weeks.